churches here in our community, if you can remember from back in January, covered this for the one emphasis for 2023 is not just for our body, though we certainly pray and want unity and oneness in our local fellowship. The body of Christ is so much larger than that, and so my prayer for this year is that we will indeed become more and more here as the church in Ravenna, the one body of Christ, and I'm grateful for Pastor Peter's leadership in that regard. Just want to remind you again, if you're looking for a simple way to invite folks, we have these little invite cards at the front entrance as well as down by the FLC entrance. We should have our new stock coming in this week, so if they're maybe pretty low, hopefully there'll be some more. But it's just a second way that you can invite people to be a part of what God is doing among us. And I trust that you'll be prayerful about that. I also trust that you'll be bold about that. God desires to see people come to faith in Jesus. And I hope that you will find what He's doing. Well, welcome. Glad you're here. Just really glad for your folks that join us as always. Online today, we are kicking off a brand new teaching series that will carry us through till Easter. If you happen to see on the Facebook this weekend, I did post a little bit of a promo video. But for this series, I'm going to borrow from a style of art, from the world of art, and specifically a genre called still life. The term still life describes a work of art that shows inanimate objects, either from nature or they are man-made objects. Things like fruit, flowers, a pile of books, a basket of wool, or some other vessel. Here's an example you can see on the screen behind me of what I'm talking about in still life. I'm sure you've probably seen these and never knew what it was called. And what artists will do when they are working in this genre is they will use the intentional arrangement of those items and the contrast that they may have in texture or color to evoke a mood in the viewer. It's intended to remind the viewer that life has hidden but often temporary beauty, even in the simplest of things. Still life is about. Though the objects may seem simple, still life says that these everyday objects are not only worth the artist's time in a brush or a photograph, but they are worth your time as a viewer. Now you might be thinking to yourself, what in the world does still life have to do with this series or with this season? Well, I believe, especially for us who've been around the church for any length of time, that the Easter season can not only be a busy season, but its scenes, its images also become very familiar to us. We have heard the stories countless times. We've seen the paintings, the pictures, the photographs. We know the scenes, the images of Easter. But it's those two realities, busyness and familiarity, that often cause us to overlook important things. We don't have time, or we deem things to be too familiar to warrant our deep attention. We fail to see their value, their importance, their beauty. So over the next 3 weeks, I want to put some images before you in a series that I'm calling Still Life. Images of redemption. You're going to find the series graphic on the screen behind me here. I want to hold these images before us. Now, on their own, these images may seem ordinary, they may seem unimportant, and I believe these images of redemption are rich with meaning. And viewing them, intently viewing them, pondering them, meditating on them, can bring us a deep perspective about Jesus' love and about His redemptive work. These are not scenes or images, but I just want to glance at and quickly move on. Last year, Wendy and I had the opportunity to take some time away, and a part of our time away is we went to the Cleveland Museum of Art. And because of some other things that we had done during the day, we arrived at the art museum about an hour or so before closing. Well, that's a huge place, and so we hustled through a portion of it. But we said, even as we were leaving, that we did not have near enough time to view everything, certainly not enough time to view things well. I don't want us to hurry through these images. I want us to lean into them, to think about them, Alabaster season holds. So with that in mind, I want to tell you today that our text is coming from Mark's Gospel, chapter 14. But as a way to share the word, I want to give opportunity over these next few weeks for others to be the voice that shares the word of the Lord with you in its reading. So this morning I would invite the leadership to come to read our text. Would you give your attention to the reading of God's word?
Now, while Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster jar of costly aromatic oil of pure gold. After breaking open the jar, she poured it on his head. But some who were present indignantly said to one another, "Why this waste of expensive ointment? It could have been sold for more than 300 silver coins and the money given to the poor." So they spoke angrily to her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a good service for you. For you will always have the poor with you, and you can do good for them whenever you want. But you will not always have me." She did what she could. She anointed my body before it came from her. I tell you the truth. Wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her.
May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word today. For artists, much like Cindy's husband Ryan, who is responsible for the art that you see behind me, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but also the work of art that we find out in the hallway. So the second way. When they prepare to paint something, they just don't grab a piece of canvas and they just immediately jump in. There's preparation that goes into painting, preparing a canvas. Perhaps they are actually the one that stretches the canvas so it's a really amount of frame. So that's in its proper position as proper tightness or tautness. Many times before picking up a brush to actually paint an image, they will coat or prime the canvas, as it were. And in so doing, that makes that canvas ready to receive the paint. It actually enhances the paint of the actual painting that goes on. It makes the brush strokes more vivid. It makes the colors more rich and vibrant. So in order to prepare our canvas this morning, I want you to kind of imagine these next three things as a bit of preparing the canvas, because it will make them the image of redemption I want to hold before you, I believe, that much richer. Let's start with the season. We're going to talk about this text in the text that tells us that this event is unfolding in these 50 verses. It says, in just a few days before Passover and Jesus' crucifixion. The text says, now Passover and unleavened bread were 2 days away. The chief priests and scribes were seeking out to seize him by stealth and kill him. For they were saying, not during the festival, otherwise they might be arrived amongst the people. You know, every season is filled with unique qualities of light and dark. And in just these first two opening verses, we begin to get a sense of the light and dark interplay that we part of this image. There is the light of Christ, the light of the world, and yet we hear glimpses of the darkness of sin, the lives of the religious leaders. Keep in mind the setting, or the season. But not only that, keep in mind the setting of this event. The text tells us that it takes place in the house of Simon the leper. And if you know anything about the things of Jesus' day, if you were one who still had leprosy, this event would not be taking place. We do not know the circumstances. Perhaps Simon is someone whom Jesus has already healed, but he continues to carry the name of Simon the leper. But he is now at a place of health in his life when he can invite people in, so he has invited Jesus, his disciples, and unnamed woman, that is the seven. part of the setting is that it is at supper. It's a meal time, and not just any meal, it is a best meal of the day in ancient times. This is the most important meal. It's part of this preparing the canvas. Holy Week will be filled with a flurry of activity for Jesus, but much like the stillness of still life art, we find in this setting a one of clothed, of respite. But make no mistake, folks, while it does not appear that there is much motion going on in the scene, there is a grand movement of redemption that is happening. It is a part of the setting that we cannot overlook what is going on. As we consider all of those things, God is framing the canvas that will enable our subject to stand out. It's important then that we talk about our subject of the day. The subject is an alabaster jar. A jar of perfume, perhaps not unlike the size or shape of some of these that I have on this table here on the platform. Alabaster is a material that resembles in many ways the things of marble, but it's much softer and so more able to be carved. You'll also find, if you look intently, in the beginnings of the portrait that I've asked Ryan to make for us for this series, an alabaster jar in the frame. That is our subject. What does this image have to teach us about Jesus' redemptive work? Because an alabaster jar, that would be something simple, something to overlook, but it's something that I believe holds great influence. It's more than just a jar. It's more than just a pleasant fragrance of perfume. You see, this alabaster jar stands today for us at the center of a portrait of love. Stands at the center of a portrait of love, a simple alabaster jar. So what is the nature of the kind of love that we see expressed in the scene that unfolds? Well, the first thing that I want you to notice is that this love that is expressed with an alabaster jar of perfume is an exclusive love. Say the word exclusive. Exclusive. The love that is expressed is an exclusive love. This room in Simon's home is filled with at least 12 or more people. Because there's Jesus, there's 12 disciples, there's Simon. We have no idea whether Simon has family there, but it's quite a few people. But when this woman enters the room, it is Jesus alone that is the center of her focus. In fact, Mark's gospel does not report a single word of interaction that she has with anyone else in the room. Nothing deters her, nothing distracts her from what she has come to do. Why? Because her love is exclusive. The perfume that is contained in her jar, while a rich perfume, expensive, to some degree a rare perfume, it was commonly used by the host of a gathering. When guests would arrive, they would dab 1 or 2 drops of spikenard on them to refresh them. This woman does not come into the room and offer that to anyone else other than Jesus. It is an exclusive love. Not only is it a portrait of exclusive love, this is a portrait of generous love. Say the word generous. It's a generous love. So I already mentioned, I love the language of the Bible translation that Cindy read from today. This expensive, this exquisite perfume. Spikenard actually is not something native to the area around Jerusalem. Most scholars say that spikenard comes from India, which is not super far, but it's still plenty far from Jerusalem. But it also comes from China. This precious ointment was imported in. Scholars say that only the best ointments were put in alabaster jars. Things that did not carry this kind of value were not put in things like alabaster. They were put in common vessels. The text itself tells us what the approximate worth of this perfume is. Verse verse 5 tells us this perfume may have been sold for over 300 denarii. That is a coin that equals essentially a day's wage. This bottle of perfume that this woman brings with her is worth almost an entire year's pay. Now, for us, maybe we don't think too much about that, but in Jesus' day, it's a big deal. It is a generous love. Again, she doesn't simply put a drop or two on Jesus. It says in the text that she actually takes her alabaster jar and she breaks it and pours it out. She doesn't just use a drop or two. She uses the entire contents. Why does she break this jar? In part because spikenard as a perfume is a very thick oil. It would be difficult to extract everything from this bag simply by pulling the lid off. So she breaks the neck of that bottle to allow full and complete access to its contents. Why does she do that? Because her love for Jesus is generous. Look at me, verse 8. First portion of that text says that she has done what she could. When I underline that word, she, the second time that it occurs, you see, a part of her generous love is that it is a personal expression. There are some who speculate that this jar of perfume is perhaps a family heirloom, something of great value that's been passed down to her. There are other scholars that suggest that this was a gift that she was holding on to as a dowry gift to be given when she became engaged and got married. This was a personal gift of hers. I don't know about you, but I've found that people seem to be far generous when they're giving away other people's money. This woman is taking what probably to her is the most valuable possession that she owns, and she freely gives it back. It's personal. It's part of her generous expression of love. Drink this in as a scene. Drink this in as an image. I love what Pastor Charles Spurgeon, the saint from a previous generation, says about this passage. He says this: I wish that all of us were ready to do some extraordinary thing for Christ. Willing to be laughed at, to be called fanatics, to be scandalized because we went out of the common way. We're not content with doing what everybody else could approve or in. Doesn't say that she did what others could have done. The text tells us that she has done what she could do. A personal, generous expression of love. It's another aspect of this love that we see in this image of the alabaster jar. And that says it's a condescending love. Say condescending. Now, most of us, when we think of condescending, we think of people, and I'll almost do this because I'm standing here and DJ's right in front of me. I'll say something about DJ, but I won't down on it. I don't speak condescendingly to him because I'm superior. Obviously, I'm up here and he's not there. But the word condescending doesn't mean just looking down on someone. The word condescending actually means to go low, to stoop, or to bow. Jesus, in coming to earth, condescends to mankind. He comes down to the low level. Not to look down on us, but to be where we are. This woman expresses a condescending kind of love. She could have entered the room. She could have handed her bottle of oil, perfume to a servant and said, would you put some of that on Jesus? But she chooses not to do that. Why? Because her love is willing to humble herself and serve Jesus. She's willing to risk not only the cost of her perfume, but risk in the social setting. What does it mean to bow before someone and to serve them? Reminds me of the scandal of the upper room, which we'll celebrate here in just a few weeks. Why is foot washing such a big deal in the upper room of health, which you'll find in John chapter 13? Why does Peter get so upset with Jesus? Because Peter looks at Jesus and he thinks he's up here And yet Jesus has taken himself a towel and a basin, and he condescends. He bows before his disciples. So even the most menial of tasks to wash feet is a demonstration of Jesus' great love. In fact, I love how John's Gospel begins that chapter. It says of Jesus, having loved his own, he loves them to the end or to the uttermost. And why does John include that? Because what follows is Jesus demonstrating the kind of love that he has. It's really absurd. That's why Jesus so many times says to his disciples, if you want to be great in the kingdom of heaven, you must be willing to serve. The Gentile rulers, they lord it over you, but it should not be amongst you. You should be prepared to serve because the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom. For we all should be ready to take up our Alabaster jar and bow for our Savior, to serve him, to condescending love. It's one more aspect of the love that we see in this woman. It's a believing love. A believing love. So we're believing. And it's a believing love. This is a little bit more difficult than perhaps that in my mind. Stay with me for a moment. In Mark's Gospel, chapter 11, we have the account of Jesus riding into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, an event that we'll celebrate next week. And the crowd around Jesus is ushering him into the city, ready to crown him as king. But once that event is over, they quickly disperse. In fact, it's just a few short days away that they say, we have no king but Caesar. This woman comes and she pours this fragrant perfume on the head of Jesus. Much like the scriptural accounts when one coronates a king. When one brings a priest into the ministry, they are anointed for ministry. And in a sense, this woman is expressing her understanding that she knows that Jesus is priest and king, is a believing love. That was the words of the Song of Solomon in chapter 1. We find these words. When the king was at his table, my perfume may forth its fragrance. Jesus the King is seated beside his table. How do we know that? Because this woman comes believing that it is Jesus as the King that he is. But I think there's another thing that's a part of our belief in this passage. Because this woman seems to somehow grasp something that his disciples did not. The 12, they seem to struggle in their understanding that Jesus was going to Jerusalem to die. They wanted to deny it. They wanted to resist it. They wanted to ignore his words. They wanted to do everything that they could to keep Jesus from the grave. But this woman comes with some deeper level of understanding. Because Jesus says that she was anointed my body for burial. This woman did not come to keep Jesus from his mission. This woman comes to participate in Jesus' redemptive mission. She anointed him beforehand. On this first look at the portrait of an alabaster jar reveals much to us of the heart about the worship, if you will, of an unnamed woman. But I'm going to take a second look now at this portrait, because I believe that it can reveal much to us about the heart of our Savior. So let's talk for a moment or two about some images of redemption that we might find in our text today. Our text today, our portrait is of an alabaster jar. It's a perfume. But I wish to make no mistake that behind it all in this portrait is a cross and a tomb. They may not be pictured as vividly as an alabaster jar or bottles to my left. But make no mistake, there is a cross and a tomb in view. If you were to read the parallel passage in Matthew's Gospel of this account, Matthew chapter 26 begins with these words, When Jesus had finished all these words, he says to his disciples, you know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man is to be handed over for crucifixion. You see, this is not just simply a dinner. The cross and the tomb were always in view. I am sure that Jesus very much enjoyed this brief moment of respite with friends, with his followers. I am sure that Jesus enjoyed the food, the drink, the fellowship that was experienced around the table. But that is not why Jesus has come. It's not why he finds himself in Bethany on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Jesus, the gospel account tells us in Matthew's gospel, that he has set his face, he has turned his attention to Jerusalem because he is coming to die. There is always the cross and the tomb that stands behind these images of redemption. But there's something else that I believe that we can find in our text in Mark's gospel. You see, I believe that redemptive love responds differently than other kinds of love. Look with me in Mark chapter 14 again. Pick up the text in verse 4. She has poured out her perfume on the head of Jesus. Verse 4 then says this, but some were indignant. They remarked to one another, why was this perfume not wasted? For this perfume might have been sold for over 300 denarii and the money given to the poor. And they were scolding her. But Jesus said, let her alone. Let her alone. While others were indignant, while others were angry, they were scolding her. Redemptive love speaks with tenderness, reformation. Speaks with love, care, and concern. Others in the room, they call her act a waste. I ask you, is there anything that is wasted when it's all given to Jesus? You see, redemptive love will take what the world says is a waste and says, no, it is a great good. Redemptive love responds differently. The motives of their concern, those around the table, they may appear good, everyone want to help the poor. But they have missed the mark, they have missed Jesus himself. They call it waste, Jesus calls it good. And Jesus will always put significance into service which he accepts. It is always significant. Because of Jesus' response of redemptive love, we then begin to see, even in Mark's gospel, in this account, the impact of love. What is love's impact that we see in all of this? Jesus says in verse 9 of chapter 14 that wherever the gospel is preached, again, behind all of this is the cross and the tomb, the good news of Jesus' redemptive love, and wherever the gospel is preached, there is powerful impact. It will stretch from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the uttermost parts of the world. And through the message of the gospel, the entirety of the world will be turned upside down. The impact of redeeming love is powerful. The impact of agape love is lasting impact. Think for a moment about what this woman has done. She's anointed Jesus with a strong perfume. It's a heavy oil. Scholars say that when that oil is applied especially to the hair, it is a fragrance that does not quickly dissipate. It will linger for several days. The act of this woman's love towards Jesus lingers with him all the way to the cross. Can you imagine Jesus hanging on the cross, even in the midst of his suffering, and the smell of the aroma of agape love rising to his lips? He smells and he remembers. He remembers the woman. Could it be that he remembers all of us as he's there on the cross? The redemptive love has far-reaching impacts more than just the immediate for Jesus. For Jesus has died on the cross for the sins of the world. Agape love gospel is preached, this woman's act will be told in memory of her. Church, please don't ever diminish the importance of simple acts of agape love. You may never know the far-reaching impact that your living out the love of Jesus that Pastor George was praying for just a little bit ago. You may never know the full and farthest reach of your act of love. The disciples certainly didn't know in that day when Jesus was crucified and when he rose from the grave. But what would become of her? We may never know. Reminds me of that old song, Little is Much, but God is much. Little is much when God's in it. The impact of agape love, not only in Jesus' demonstration of that love, is far-reaching. But when we live out his love, it is far-reaching impact. She did what she could, and she trusts the rest of it. That's all that he asks of us to do as well. So as I wrap up today, let's talk about this picture in a different way. It's not just look at an alabaster jar in our painting today. But let's find ourselves within the frame of that portrait. Rather than critiquing the artist, critiquing the actual work itself, let's do a little critiquing of us as a viewer. Let's find ourselves within that frame. So here's some simple questions for us today. The setting of this portrait is Simon's home at a table over a meal to have an intimate fellowship. How often do you and I make room at the table for Jesus? How often do you and I make room at the table with Jesus? How often do we place ourselves in intimate fellowship with him? Is he a regular and constant guest in your life or your home, or is he an infrequent visitor? Is Jesus here at the table with you? When you sit down at the table with Jesus in intimate fellowship, do you come with your own idea of how things are supposed to be? That stands at odds with the mission, the work of Jesus. He said, you should have sold that for him and given it to the poor. And Jesus says, no, there's a greater purpose before you. When you fellowship with Jesus, do you come with your own agenda or do you submit? Because that's a part of our condescending love that we're called to. Picture yourself in this group. And you see the expression of love for someone else, and probably one of the easiest places for us to understand this is here in this space. When you look around in the course of worship, have you ever had a thought of seeing somebody and maybe they're very much in the spirit of worship with their hands raised? In the back of your mind, you're thinking to yourself, that's not what I mean. You begin to have judgmental thoughts. You begin to squelch. You want to have some indignation about somebody's what you would consider too much expression of worship. When you encounter other people's expression of love for Jesus, are you quick to judge? Am I quick to judge? And is our judgment, our indignation born out of some false sense of piety, some false sense of feeling like we're right? Because I believe Jesus calls us to something different. Does your expression of love, does it seek the approval of others, or does it seek the approval of Jesus? How would you describe your love? That's how we find ourselves in this reading. Would we have been generous and personal as this woman was with her alabaster jar of perfume? When you evaluate your love, is it personal, generous? What are you bringing today to offer to Jesus in worship? What do you bring to him day after day in your relationship? Are you bringing all of yourself, or are you bringing only a few drops? Is it personal? Is it lavish? Have we given the best that we can, or do we hold back in some way for Jesus? Wholehearted expressions of love can have a powerful impact, not only for you and your life with Jesus, your expresses love and worship has an impact on me. Anytime I have the privilege of leading worship, one of the things that touches my heart more than anything else is being able to watch others worshiping. When we offer all of ourselves personally in a lavish way, a generous way to Jesus, it has a powerful impact. Are you at the table with Jesus? And if you are, what have you brought? Are you willing to use somebody else's gifts, somebody else's resources, or do you bring your own? And do you give it to Jesus freely, generously, lavishly? Simple questions, but it frames where we are in this portrait. I want you today to carry this image of an alabaster jar. There's an unbeautifully painted Ravenna, or maybe you can just picture one of these bottles on the solid platform. But I want you to carry this image with you as you go through this place. Throughout the season, I'm inviting you to slow down, take a breath, maybe just have a seat. Make time to take in these images of redemption in a fascinating way. But today, specifically, I am asking for you to allow the Spirit to search your heart. What are you bringing to Jesus? What is your expression of love towards Him? Do you have a deepening understanding of His great gift of love for you? His great gift of love for me? Because if we have an ever deepening understanding of that, Jesus says, for the one who has been forgiven little loves little, but the one who has been forgiven much loves much. We ask Him to help you to overflow with the kind of love that's expressed by an unnamed woman with a simple alabaster jar of you. Today, it's my prayer that you will allow God to break your heart. And it reminds me of an old gospel song, Ravenna's heart. Just for love of you, Jesus, my own gracious treasure, will lavish upon you. Why? Because He has lavished His love on me. He allowed Himself to be broken and spilled out, and used it for me. So I pray for you today that this Easter season will allow your heart to be broken in a fresh way. So would you stand as I invite the person to come back? This is why your husband.